I don't know if there's anyone actually out there. We're going to get started with this session on risk and conflict. We're going to start with Osaretin Olurotimi. Okay. All right. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. My name is Asas, and I'll be sharing my work with you on the effects of conflict on learning outcomes, and I provide some evidence from Uganda. Okay, it doesn't seem to be scrolling. Okay. Okay, it's working now. Okay, so just to define conflict, what I mean by conflict is armed violence or armed confrontation between two or more parties. And I just want to provide a bit of motivation for why this topic is important, in my opinion. I think, first of all, I think most people, especially people who work in education and in Africa, we recognize that learning and schooling doesn't always track together. So even the Sustainable Development Goals on Education, Goal 4, has distinct objectives that are focused on literacy and numeracy, aside from improving access to schooling. So that's the first point. And I think the second one is that this is a map from Human Capital Africa. The second big idea motivating this work is that there's a lot of learning poverty across Africa. So about 8 in 10 children who are of primary school age or have completed primary school cannot read. And so that motivates this work. I think the second arm of that is that conflict is unfortunately growing in Africa. So this is state-based conflict, and we can see that it's trending upwards in Africa. And I think with the war in Eastern Europe and the disruption that has caused both in Ukraine and even in countries receiving refugees, I think that understanding how conflict affects learning is becoming more salient. So what does this paper do? The questions that I ask is mainly what's the impact of conflict on learning outcomes? And I try to see if a shock like conflicts can have different effects on learning and schooling. In particular, I'm looking at a particular historical conflict incident in Uganda. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So I'm asking what's the effect of being exposed to this terrorist group? And I also provide evidence of exposure to effect contemporaneously. So when I mean by contemporaneously, I mean conflict that happens in the same year that children were surveyed. I also do some heterogeneous analysis, and I think one real contribution of this paper is that I'm able to provide some results on children who do not attend school, which is really absent in a lot of studies on conflict. So just to describe, before I go into my data and show you my strategy and my results, I want to help you situate my empirical strategy in the context. So Uganda, where this study is based, is divided into districts. Think of them as analogous to states in the United States. And those districts are subdivided into counties and sub-counties. So think of Orange County, and then cities within Orange County, like Anaheim as a sub-county. And within Anaheim, think of like a small neighborhood, which are called parishes. And this is the level that I measure exposure to conflict in Uganda. The average population of a parish is about 4,000 people. So if you think that children are about a quarter of that, so think about 1,000 children live in a parish. Uganda has had many episodes of conflict, but the most salient one, or the most, I think, well-known, the most pervasive one has been the one enacted by the Lord's Resistance Army. I don't know if we've seen Kobe 2012. It was a video that went viral about the leader. So the LRA was known to be this deadly terrorist group. So I look at, in particular, how does exposure to LRA affect children's learning? So just to describe my data, My data comes from an organization called UWEZO, and they are part of this collective that is collecting citizen-led assessment of learning outcomes across Africa. I know this data intimately because I used to work with the Nigerian version of this organization. So they collect data on children within the households. In Uganda, where this paper is based, each year they sample about 80,000 children. So it's a cross-section at the children level, but I was able to create a panel at the parish level where I measure exposure. So that leaves me with about 60,000 children each year. The outcomes that I measure are learning outcomes in maths and English. And how it works is that a child is tested progressively on the different domains of knowledge within maths. So starting from number recognition to division, which is the arrest in this context. And in English, it is starting from letter recognition to whether a child can read a story. I also provide results on, I think, a more deeper measure of cognition, English comprehension, which is whether a child can answer correctly a question on based on a story that they have read. So my conflict data comes from AAEA, and the great thing about AAEA data is that it's geo-located. So I use GPS information to calculate distances between the parishes where children live and the exact location of an AAEA conflict in the data. This just shows you LRA activity by year. It really became more violent after 1996, which is also the period that AAEA collects the data, and it peaked in around 2003. So this is like a graph trying to show you where LRA activity is concentrated in Uganda, and we can see that it's concentrated in the north. So the dark blue are parishes that experienced LRA activity. In my data, the average child is about 10. They are in grade 4. The average child can add and read words, but not paragraphs or stories. About 2% of children in the data are school dropouts. So my empirical strategy, quickly. So what I use is a difference in differences estimation approach, where I'm estimating the differential impact for children who were old enough to be exposed to LRA cohort. So that's they were born before 2006. They're old enough to have experienced LRA activity. And I'm looking at the differential impact for children who live within 10 kilometers of an LRA event. So beta 1 is my differential impact. And of course, the assumption that I'm resting on is that there are parallel trends that conditional on including parish fixed effects, that educational outcomes have evolved similarly in LRA parishes versus the rest of Uganda. I checked these parallel trends with mothers' education. So mothers who have completed their education before LRA became active. And we see that this trend, for brevity, I would skip it, but you're welcome to look at it in the paper, or if we have time, I'll show you that graph. When I look at contemporaneous conflict, which is conflict that happens in the same year that children are surveyed, I use the Callaway and Santa Ana estimator. So results, am I doing on time? Okay, great. So I'll run through the results very quickly. So the main results I have, how does conflict affect learning outcomes? So because maths and English have different skills, I standardize them so that it's more comparable. And we see that exposure to LRA, living in an LRA parish worsens a child's learning outcome in both maths and English, and also in English comprehension. I also want to say that when I look at cohorts who were not born, who do not experience LRA activity, I do not find any results. So this result is pretty robust to that. In the literature, the traditional outcomes that are looked at when you think about children's human capital is schooling. So I also look at some schooling measures. So on track is whether a child is in the right age for grade. Dropout is a binary variable, whether a child is a dropout. Enrolled is a child's self-reported school enrollment status. Of children who are enrolled, some of them have never attended school. And this result really surprises me. I find that exposure to LRE does not have any adverse effect and on most of these measures. In fact, children who were exposed to LRA are more likely to be enrolled in school. So taking together the results I showed you previously, and this one shows that even when schooling is not affected, a shock like conflict can have divergent effects on learning and schooling. To try and tease out what some mechanisms, I look at some measures of physical disability, and I find no results of being exposed to LRA on those. Heterogeneous effects by gender, I find that across all these measures, the impacts of LRA are worse for girls. I think one interesting fact is that we can already see that girls perform worse on maths, even in this context at this age. So there's already a STEM gap going on. I think that deserves its own research agenda. Looking at school enrollment status, so I look at children who have never enrolled in school, who are of school going age, and I find that there's only a differential negative effect on their learning outcomes in maths, but not in English. And why this may be so may be that there are many opportunities to learn English socially, in churches, in markets, and maths may need more scholarly engagement. I also looked at contemporaneous conflict, and this is not just LRA conflict in this instance, this is all conflict that happens between 2010 and 2015. And I find muted effects on math scores, but not on English scores. You might wonder whether these results are robust. They are to a lot of other specifications. One big caveat that I have though is that I'm not able to look at migration patterns in LRA parishes versus non-LRA. So I'm assuming that the composition of those who I see now are the same as those who were there when LRA was active. So let me conclude. I think what I want you to remember and I think take away from here is that exposure to conflict has an adverse effect on learning outcomes, even when schooling is unaffected. So as we think of shocks like COVID-19 that just happened, things going on, I think it's very important that those who study human capital distinguish between these two effects. So I think that's methodologically important. So, and I think that these results matter for future earnings potential. There's a paper by Valero that shows that cognition is really what matters, not schooling in African context for earnings potential. And if you think about the big macro picture, Anushek, I think in his 2016 or 2013, if I'm correct, shows that even for growth pathways of countries, increasing number of years of education would not matter for long-term growth if the cognitive content of citizens is not improved. And I think given that a lot of us are academics, this is just a plug for empathy, that test scores are noisy, they're affected by things like exposure to shocks like conflict. So I would end on this note. I thank you for your attention. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yes. So how? No, so all LRA conflict is violent. So LRA conflict makes up 50% of the Ugandan conflict. And when I limit it to the period when they're active, it's over 60%. The other major actors are the military and the Ugandan police force. Yes. Mhm. Okay, I can certainly do that. Although I do control for parish fixed effect, so things within the same location that don't change. And I also include a sub-county, like the level above parish, a sub-county, but yet time trend to control for like educational policy changes. But I think your point is noted to show more descriptives about how, yeah, point is taken. Mm-hmm. I think it might be schooling quality and access. And I have a theoretical model in the paper where I postulate that there is schooling quality and access. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I feel like you're on the cusp of like kind of getting to the mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
So that's suggesting that it has to do with the school.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if the school could use another data set to actually look at the regular attendance.
Absolutely. So that's future work. I actually do have data on school attendance, on teacher absenteeism, on schooling, some measures of schooling quality. And so that's one area of future work to really look at how does this affect schooling. Yeah, but I just want to say that there's also precedent for this kind of results in Uganda. So I forgot his name now, but I think Chris Bartlett, Barrett, they have a paper on Uganda where they look at children who were forced into abductions by LRA. Their study is very small and very particular. And they find that for those people, they don't have less schooling on average than the general population. And I think a lot of it has been because aid workers there's been a lot of infrastructure redevelopment in that region following the devastation. But I think what we're seeing is that there's also a need for a more, I think, investments in cognition beyond schooling. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I can do that. Though I'm a bit skeptical. That household income is endogenous. Like LRA could have affected household incomes. Although I see parental income and assets, I don't have enough parental control, so I can't really look at that as an outcome. But looking at it well, I can definitely look at it, but I would be reluctant to place weights on whatever I find in there. But I'll definitely do that. All right, thank you so much for the comments. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. My name is Song, and I founded at a organization. And this is a work with my colleagues at EPIC. We do causal inference and impact evaluation using randomized control trial and also experimental approaches to study impact of intervention related to climate change. So this one is a recent work with my colleagues at FAO, and here we look at the climate security in Somalia through the lens of spatial heterogeneity. And the starting point of our study is the following question: does climate change affect conflict? Well, the short answer is yes, but not directly. So the study shows that on average, increasing drought leads to more conflict, mainly through agricultural price channels. Now, the keywords in that sentence from a policy perspective is average, because of course, as economists, average is an important moment to estimate, but from a policy perspective, it's not very informative because essentially you're assuming everything is the same everywhere, right? You're imposing spatial homogeneity in the sense that, okay, I'm estimating average effect, which is basically a national average. Now, if you tell that to agencies or humanitarian agencies like FAO, you tell them, okay, this is a national average effect. They will ask you, so what? Where should we target when the resource is scarce, right? And that assumption, that spatial homogeneity assumption, is especially restrictive in the context of countries like Somalia. So let me give you a little bit of background. So in Somalia, we see a very wide spread of conflict and also a very widespread of drought and climate disasters. And on the other hand, as you probably know, Somalia is a very politically and ethnically fragmented country. Let me show you, I think I have the map here. Yes, so we see a very different patterns of conflict and disaster across the country. Most of the conflicts are in the what we call inter-riverine regions right here, and much peaceful in the north, which is Somaliland. Now, this area has been historically controlled by Al-Shabaab. It's been a very conflict-affected area. And on the other hand, the drought has been more frequent, but they also tend to cluster in particular regions in the south. On the other hand, for agricultural activities, more than half of the population is nomadic or semi-nomadic, and which means you have a very spatially distributed agricultural activities that are spread across the country. So in that context, it's kind of unrealistic to assume that the same relationship will happen the same way everywhere. So that kind of motivates our research question: does the relationship between drought and conflict mediated by agricultural prices change across districts? And if so, where should we target? To give you a highlight of what we found, yes, on average, we confirm what people have discovered before, that agricultural price volatility is kind of a magnifier of a drought-induced conflict. But more than that, we also found substantial spatial heterogeneity in the sense that most of the districts that are affected by conflicts are also more sensitive to price change after drought. But it's not a perfect correlation in the sense of, we also found districts that are right now not affected by conflict as much, but they tend to be sensitive to price volatility, which means in the absence of market intervention or humanitarian support, they might develop into future hotspots of conflict. So that gives us some policy implication of peace building, which I will talk about later at the conclusion part. Empirical strategy is an extremely simple econometric model. It's random coefficient model. The easy way to understand this is this allows the coefficient of interest to vary across your unit of analysis. So here we regress a log of conflicts on drought, price drought, interaction, and a bunch of control variables. The key parameters of interest is the random intercept, the random slopes of that interaction term, as well as their correlation. Now, this model has several advantages. One of the major advantages is it allows us to capture the existence and the extent of spatial heterogeneity. Using this model, we're able to see which districts is more affected by price volatility, and which districts are less affected. So that gives the ability to test and predicting district-specific effects. We control for some common factors such as regional fixed effect time trend and functioning number of functioning water sources. We're using the same AAEA data set as the conflict data. So, okay, let me show you the results on average. So this is the results of the fixed component, which is the national average. This is sort of a re-examining of what people have done before. So what we found is, yes, on average, price volatility tend to intensify the drought-conflict relationship. In other words, if the district experience some price volatility, the drought-induced conflict tend to be more frequent in that district. So that's the average effect. But what's more interesting is when we look at the heterogeneity by examining the random coefficient, right? So here we extract the random coefficient by districts, and we see some substantial variation across space. And the red spots here are the districts that are more sensitive to price changes after drought. So here we're looking at maize and goat. These are maize is the main staple crop in Somalia, and goat is the main livestock. And we see that there are several hotspots in the districts around Mogadishu and also in the Dolo area. And with that, we can do something more policy relevant in terms of where should we target for peace building effort. So, let me try to explain what we're doing here. So here, we're looking at the distribution of the random intercepts and the random slopes. So these two are the slopes, and these two are the intercepts, and these two are the slopes. Now, an easy way to interpret the intercept is the higher intercept. It means the higher structural presence of conflict. So if you look at the right side of the distribution, we're looking at those that are high in this intercept. So these are districts that are experiencing larger number of conflicts. And then we do the similar to the slope, and we select districts that are high in the distribution of slopes, which means these are the districts that tend to be more sensitive, they're more elastic to price change. Now, when we combine those, we're able to select districts that are both currently experiencing a high number of conflicts and those that are sensitive to price change. And we call this climate insecurity hotspots in the sense that they are currently the hotspots and they tend to be sensitive to price variations. Now, when we look at the characteristics of those regions, they tend to be the dry agro-pastoralist areas, and they're largely controlled by Al-Shabaab. Some of these are along the migration lines of refugees, so they tend to experience more conflicts related to fighting for resource, such as water. So in those regions, when there are structural causes of conflicts, which makes this climate insecurity hotspots. And then we would flip the criteria that we select the intercept. Now we're looking at districts that are low in conflicts, but are high in the slope, which means in those districts, right now they have a relatively lower number of conflicts, but they tend to be sensitive to price change, which means right now they are relatively peaceful, but in the future, without price intervention, market support programs, they might develop into future hotspots in the face of drought. And we look at those districts, they tend to be located more in the north. They're relatively, right now they're relatively peaceful. They are more controlled by government. but they may evolve in the future into climate insecurity hotspots. So in those areas, it's better to have some preventative actions and anticipatory programs. Okay, conclusion and policy implications. Well, first of all, we found that the effect between drought and conflict, on average, we confirm what previously I had found. It's the opportunity cost hypothesis in the context of Somalia. It means when there's drought, there's a negative shock on livestock production, for example, on goat. And that's an income shock, which means people now has lower opportunity costs to join the conflict groups. And when moving on from that, we found that if you only look at the average effect, that might cover a very different pictures across districts, and that emphasizes the importance of looking at spatial heterogeneity in the context like Somalia. Because for the same mean, you can have very diverse distribution of effects or very centered effects. And our study basically says that for a country like Somalia, you might want to look not only the mean, but also the variance of the effects that you're interested in. And for policy implication, since we select two types of hotspots, for the climate insecurity hotspots, it's important to tackle the structural causes of conflicts in those districts. Whereas for the climate vulnerability hotspots, it's important to design and implement some preventative actions that prevent them into developing into future hotspots. Now, we studied this in the context of Somalia, and we're looking only at two particular agriculture price channels, but this framework can be extended to study other channels or other types of moderators. So I think that's pretty much all I want to share. And thank you. I'm happy to discuss. Yes, Ben.
So, two kind of related questions. So one is, if you were just naively looking at where are there conflicts in Somalia and maybe by like season, right? So like traditional dry season or something. Is there a big difference between the hotspots you would find just with that versus the kind of method, that you're kind of thinking about? And if so or if not, to what extent do you think the kind of agricultural market effects, these price effects that you're finding are kind of just markers of, oh, there's a big problem here, versus there's some kind of mediation that you could do if the market was more robust? So
Yes, yes, I see. So let me make sure I understand that. You're thinking, for example, if there's a robust market, it can be a kind of a mediator that reduces the negative impact.
yeah, I mean, essentially, that's kind of what your opportunity cost hypothesis might be. So if there's a productive shock, it's not translated into huge price swings, potentially there's not this big, conflict driver. So
Yeah, right. One thing is this is not structural. This is a reduced form. One reason is, yes, you can use whether it's IV and look at how the channel works, right? But then there's a very strong identification assumption about weather affects conflicts only through market channel. That's a pretty strong identification assumption. And in terms of the market in Somalia, it's not very well established markets. We have very informal local markets, and we don't have data on particular markets. This is more districts average. But yeah, I see that that's a very valid point. And also kind of what we're suggesting here. Yes. Yes.
I have two thoughts. and I wanted to put ideas on that. So you were maybe looking into the channel of volatile ag prices, and I wanted to know what's your thought on how does this translate into the income channel, because the prices are increasing for some for the maize crop, which is happening with the wheat crop. So how does that translate? Because I am understanding that for the purely farming households, they might be gaining income. And then the second part related to that is that how, I mean, what do you think about the idea that there is some distributional consequences to the fact that purely farming households might, choose to sell less of their marketable surplus because the prices are high, whereas the purely pastoral households might be not in that state because they cannot basically, I mean, they do not have marketable surplus because they are pastoral households. And so in terms of distributional consequences, farming households are more affected. I mean, they're gaining, whereas the pastoral households are more like they're losing out. So
Yeah, so for the pastoralist household, there's still a market for both.
right. Okay, so okay.
Yeah, I probably didn't explain that very well. So the when people think about opportunity cost, it's because there's the drought happens, right? And it affects the feed, which affects your animal, and then people sell their animal before they die, which you sell animal at a very bad condition, which means you sell at a very low price. If that happens in the region, you have a very low gold price. If you observe a very low gold price, and since that's the main source of income for the household, that's a major income source, which means now you have a lower opportunity cost, or it's easier for food and also not to recruit people because they do pay people money for joining the group. So that's also related to the first semester. But yeah, I see. So you're thinking how the price change translates into income. That's a very good point, and the key of this. Yes, yeah, I'm just wondering about the climate vulnerable hotspots where they're sensitive to price changes when they do not have the conflicts. And your model speaks to why that is. Like, why is it that the same sensitivity is resulting in less conflict in some places? Right, I was hoping no one asked that question. That is a very good question. So this model, that's one indication of this model, we can't tell why. We can do some contextual analysis using qualitative analysis, more case study analysis. You can look at particular region and see. This is more like an ex post explanation. So you see the pattern and try to find the regression, rationalize it. But I think most of what we found does make sense. So in those areas, they tend to have less ethnic issues, so they don't have a structural cause of conflicts. Whereas in other hotspots, you have like historic, persistent conflicts between different ethnic groups, and it's also related to if it's controlled by a single authority or it's controlled by multiple authorities. If it's at close to the border of Ethiopia, etc. So this brings me to the if I may, the other question. If there's structural things, like can you decompose how much is structural underlying things and how much is price? Because if you're arguing for intervention, if it's really the deeper structural things, then maybe an intervention in the vulnerable places, may not work. Yeah. Sure. Yes, I get your point. So we're thinking to decompose the causes that contribute to the resistance of conflict. Yeah. Well, I guess what I was trying to say is conflict is a very complicated phenomenon. Right? The causes is very complicated, and it's very hard to maybe relatively you can say something like which is the dominant factor, which is less. But yeah, for policy implication, I agree. That's the direction to go. Yes, please.
I have two semi-related questions.
Sure.
The first technical one would be, what is the temporal unit of the SP that we use to define growth?
Yes, this is monk
District. Yes. Okay.
By amount, by district.
No, I think the unit of the SPI itself, so SPI is the multi-scalar index in measuring.
Oh, yes, we're trying different the accumulation period. Yes, we try, all the way from 1 to 9, also try to be, consistent with the agricultural season in Somalia. Because we want to have that accumulation period that kind of a reasonable, consider the agricultural production cycle. But we found pretty robust evidence across the accumulation period. And the main model is like 3, I think, 3 months.
And my second question is going to be, so maize and wheat, right, is fairly well documented, the relationship.
I'm sorry. Maize?
Maize and wheat prices.
Yes.
So in Somalia specifically, that's been written about quite extensively, but if you were scaling this up to other countries, how would you go about finding kind of those two,
Yeah.
key prices?
This is mainly in the context of Somalia and follow the maize and efforts. They look at gold prices, they have the for pastoralist regions, especially that's the main animal. In other countries, yes, it has to be more context specific. Depending on which country we're talking about, I think it's in Africa, it's usually gold, camel, sheep, etc. Good question. Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Hi everyone. Yeah, my name is Gustavo. I'm coming from University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. I am going to present a paper that we have been working on with Professor Katie Baylis and Benjamin Cross. And it's about the peace accord that happened in Colombia during 2016. So the overview that I'm going to show you is the research question, the context that appear in this conflict, the data that we use, because this is a really important data, the empirical strategy, and the concluding remarks that we have. So what is the mainly research question, and actually what is the mainly motivation of this paper is, does peace affect the investment decision of the household in the short term? And this is a really important question because violence has an endogeneity effect that is really difficult to measure, as our partners have shown. And it's difficult to measure because you don't know what is going to be the direction of the conflict, and what is causing the conflict, and if it's going to be one or two-way the conflict. And this event that happened in Colombia allow us to see what happens when the conflict stop in a really homogeneous way in a country. So what we found mainly in the paper was like households increase the investment after the peace appeared in the country, almost twofold. And this investment was not translated into increasing the assets of the farm, but instead was to change the portfolio decision of the household. Which what happened was like the household increased the permanent crops in the farm and decreased the transitory crops in the farms, which is showing us like the farmers are changing the way that they see the future in the investment. And also we saw that this increase didn't come at the expense of the consumption, but what we saw is like the farmers are taking more credit to these investments. So why is this important in the literature? And it's because there are two main ways that you can see the conflict with investment. One is like if you see a conflict in one country, that might have like negative outcomes, and you can think about there are many problems with the security of the property rights because of two things: the destruction of capital. You can see I'm not going to invest because my capital is going to be destroyed. Or the other thing is like the expropriation of assets in the local population. Perhaps some of the armed groups are going to take the assets or are going to take the revenue of the farmers. So that's is not going to encourage the farmers to invest. But you might think another way, which is also important, is perhaps like conflict might appear in places that the government doesn't have a really good structure in that country. So there are some cases, for instance, in Iraq and Nepal, that civil war, the armed groups there were saw by the community as a state-like governing functions. They were really useful for the community because the state was not there, and it was good for the investment in those places. And also for instance, in Angola civil war, big companies, multinational companies use the war as an opportunity to invest because they were located in places that the government was not present, but also the non-armed group, like the armed group was not present. So they leveraged the opportunity to not pay tax and also to avoid the civil war. So you might think like in a conflict context, you can also see investment increase. It's not a trivial question. It's a difficult question. So what we see, like what we want to contribute in the literature is like most of the literature, as we have seen, evaluate the marginal attacks, the violent shocks, and it's really difficult to check what is going to be the peace, the effect of peace. It's very difficult to see what is going to be the effect. And we also want to extend this literature through a natural experiment that happened in Colombia through the peace negotiation that happened between the government and the FARC, which is the non-state armed group. And also much of the previous literature in armed conflict and investment has focused on behavior of large multinational firms because those are the firms that are really good to follow, and it's easy to follow those, but the small farms are really difficult to follow. What are going to be the investment? So this is the context that I'm going to show you. Like Colombia had one of the longest civil war in Latin America. It lasted 50 years, since 1960 when the guerrillas foundation, and it ended in 2016. There were two important points that happened during the history. In 2002, there was an election of a president that the name is President Uribe. This president increased the attacks to the non-state armed group, and that was like the most intense war period of the country until the next period started, which was the election of President Santos. President Santos was the Secretary of Defense of President Uribe. So you might think like he will follow the same structure that what happened with President Uribe, but that was not the case. The case was like there was a peace negotiation that started in 2012 that almost nobody was expected because he was going to be the following governor. And what happened is like this peace accord had like some specific feature, and it's like during the negotiation the war continued. So they were doing the negotiation, but the war still continued because the negotiation was in La Habana, Cuba, and we was not in the country. So they still fight until a bilateral ceasefire started in 2014. And it was something not expected. There was two ceasefire, in 2013 and 2014. And after that ceasefire, the 98% of the activities of the FARC decreased over all the country. So those events changed drastically the violence in the country. So what is the data that we are using? We are using data that is collected by La Universidad de los Andes in Colombia. We're using data from 2010, 2013, 2016, and those places, as you can see, are times that happened before the peace agreement, during the peace agreement, and after the peace agreement. And we are using panel data from households located in 16 different districts through Colombia. And we restrict this sample in the whole 3 periods, and we are only using panel data from all observations that sustain in the same village. We prove later, we do a robustness check using also those people that are living the villages, and we didn't find any different result. So what is the empirical strategy? And this is important in the sense like we leverage the reported that this village has, because Colombia is, the organization of Colombia is mainly a state, this municipality and village. So we wanted to use the village as a granular level, but the problem is like the government doesn't have that information. They use a district level as violence. So we use the information that the leaders of the villages have in the presence of the armed group. So we the leaders of the villages knew if they have presence of the armed group, and we believe that this knowledge is really accurate because the communities are between 800 and 2,000 people, the village, and also we use the same information at district level from the government, and we didn't find any difference in the presence whole the country. And we use also the report that the village level had in 2006 and 2010, which is a period that you didn't expect that the villagers knew that it was going to be a peace accord, because as I told you, it was a period that it was when the war was more intense because the president was attacking a lot. So this is the scripted data that I have. As you can see, like there are two parallel trends here. One is the presence and the other doesn't have presence. And I'm showing you in the left part the murders, which is one of the measure. So as you can see, they have parallel presence in the places that has parallel trends in the places that have presence and in the places that doesn't have. And after the ceasefire decreased the murders a lot. And the investment in those places were also following parallel trends and increased a lot after the ceasefire. So what is the empirical strategy that we are following? And is that difference and difference estimation? Usually, what we are using is like the important parameter that we want to know actually is beta 2, because that's the one that's showing us where they have presence, the armed group has presence, and what is happening in those places after the peace accord. And we are also using fixed effects and time fixed effects too, household fixed effects and time fixed effects too. And we are also using we're controlling variables for consumption, well, number of people in the household, and also we are also controlling for infrastructure in the village. So what are the main results? This is one of the main results that we have, and it's like as you can see, the FARC times post is the effect of the peace in the investment, and we're using an IHS transformation, which is very close to a logarithm transformation. But we prefer to use this because this transformation accounts for zeros in the distribution. So as you can see, almost the investment increased almost twofold. And if we do the same analysis at levels in the farm, we also see an important increase. We check the robustness of these estimates using, as I told you before, baselines, controls at baseline, and also controls at village level to check if the estimators change, and we see that they sustain. We also prove parallel trend for this analysis, and yeah, it was successful, the proof. Now, what is the important? There's an important part here, and what is the farm are using this investment to what? Why are they using the investment? So what we saw, and we calculated the percentage of used land of the farm that the household had, and we saw an increase of perennial crops, 16 percentage points of increasing, and we saw a decrease of short-term crops, 70%. And we also are seeing a decrease in pasture, which is livestock investment. And as you can see, the last column is showing us all the combination of this productive area. And what we are seeing is like they are not increasing at all the assets. The only thing that is happening is like they are changing the portfolio decision. So the investment that is coming to the farm is only to reallocate the resources that they have in the farm. This is kind of an evidence that what is happening, like they are seeing like the future is going to improve, and the future is better because they are investing in perennial crops, which are crops that you will have a revenue 10 or 15 years in the future. Short-term crops are going to give you revenue only in 1 year or less than 1 year. So that means like they are seeing the future in a different way because they are investing also in different way. And also we wanted to check where does this investment coming from? And as you can see, the savings is not the resource that what is happening. They are taking the investment from the debt. And this is also this is a proof that the farmers or the household are not credit constrained. You may expect it by the theory, like if they were credit constrained, the savings should decrease or increase because they want to smooth consumption, but this is not the case. They are increasing the debt and all the investment is coming from those parts. So as a summary, our findings suggest that the ceasefire was interpreted by the household as a signal of a better investment environment because they increased the investment in the farm, and also what is happening is like they are changing the portfolio decision. They are seeing the future in a better way, that the long term they are seeing the long term in a better way than the short term, because they're investing more in permanent crops than in short-term crops. And this investment that do not come at the expense of consumption. So what they are doing is like they are increasing the crate. They are not sacrificing consumption for this. And also we have another result, and it's like the piece also had a special spillover that I wanted to show you. I didn't know if I had the opportunity to show you this, but this is the same estimate that I showed you before, but we included villages that were close to our treatment, which is the neighborhoods. And what we are seeing is like the investment also increased, which is the third column, and the perennial and the short-term crops are behaving in the same way that in the other, but with a shorter magnitude, which also is showing us like there is a spillover effect, but the magnitude is less than when there was an actual conflict in the country. So, yep, that's it, what I have to do. Thank you. Do you have any comments or questions? Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I understand. Well, so I mean that they are doubling the investment, and you want to see if those resources are going to, like, what is the magnitude that is going to the long term, and the magnitude that is using them to avoid the short term, if that's the question. Yeah, that's a really good question, and we have been trying to do that, but actually the data is not data is not useful for that, because we don't have what is going to be the direct effect of the investment that they have. We only see like they are investing more in the farm, and we know what is the land that they are using, but we don't know actually what is the investment reallocated. But yeah, that's true.
There is some other sources of investment as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's percentage. Yeah.
It's a decrease in the.
Yeah, they're netting.
Okay, in terms of the.
Yeah, and then calculate percentage for overall endowment. So what are the perennial crops?
I mean, yeah.
What is happening here? What are they?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so in Colombia, as we are a tropical country, what is happening there, the perennial crops are things that you might think about in a tropical country as banana, coffee, avocado, all of those crops that last more than 10 years to have a revenue, because there are tree-based crops, right? So you need to wait for the tree to grow, and after that you can get the revenue for that growth. The other short-term crops are things like lettuce, tomato, things that only take 6 months just to harvest. So yeah, those are the crops.
So in this case, we're substituting between horticultural crops
Yeah, 2-3 base, yeah.
But it doesn't affect things like irrigation or other infrastructure.
No, we check for that, and yeah, we are not seeing an increase in irrigation or infrastructure. They are only changing like, yeah, the way that they invest in the land. And it might be the case that in Colombia, we don't have that problem of irrigation because there is a lot of rain in the, I mean, I think it's the first or the second country that most rain in the world. So yeah, we don't have that problem of irrigation. And that's why I think it's also very easy to change the crops.
Also, I'm thinking the spatial slow or that's.
Ah, okay, yeah. So
If you use the ID, you're assuming this stable unit.
yeah, and let me show you that also. Sorry, no, I don't have. But what we did, and that's also a really good question. That what we did is like we included the neighboring areas in this graph, and they are also having the same pattern trend and is disrupting after the ceasefire. But the control group is still going in the same way.
So I don't know Colombia context very well, but I'm thinking that the president is still that the overall quality of governance is in the critical improve that area. And I'm not sure that time yet captures that, given that the quality of views.
Did you want to show something? Go ahead.
Yeah, we tried to prove that also because that's an important thing, and it's like we wanted to check that with support programs that the government had. So there are two important ones that are regarding to violence, which are the land law, and the other one is the victim law. So the people receive subsidies from the government if they had like a violence problem. And we check that if the government is helping the people, but what we saw is that actually that's not happening. The government is not helping the people during that period, and it looks like it's mainly a self-decision of the farms. It's not that the government is helping them. Okay.
Thank you, Gustavo. Interesting. Okay, so the last presentation is going to be on guaranteed storage, risk and credit constraints for post-harvest technology. And we're going to be working in Bangladesh. This is joint work with GSINU, also at Kansas State University. And we want to thank our research partners, HKI Bangladesh, for really valuable assistance. As you're going to see, a lot of data collection happened during a really challenging time. So they really did a great job. And Arusha Ijaz for really valuable research assistance. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about is kind of a pretty standard topic, I think, at this conference, technology adoption in agriculture. There's a huge literature on this and barriers to profitable technology adoption. One of these barriers that gets talked about a lot is liquidity constraints. There's a really good solution to that. Okay, someone needs credit, you can give credit, and there's a lot of great interesting papers on even new mobile credit and digital credit, but pretty standard. We know how to solve a liquidity constraint. Somebody needs cash, you can give them cash. Risk constraints are also probably pretty important. And there's not really a standard solution for this one. In the US context, right, we crop insurance is obviously huge and highly subsidized. In developing country context, the literature is pretty strong in showing that, you know, micro and various forms of index and micro insurance are not taken up and are very difficult to kind of implement and actually insure. And there's a lot of different reasons why that's the case. So it's also a nice big literature. But it's a difficult problem because we know risk constraints are probably really important, but we don't have this really easy solution that we can just roll out. We're also going to be working in the literature on hermetic storage. So this is a kind of a technology that probably you've seen more and more papers kind of roll out and try to look at, because it's been being scaled up in some of the donor countries, and organizations like World Food Program, right, have been pushing these technologies. These are bags that will help farmers to store grains and seeds for longer period of times. Essentially, they make it so that pests can't survive in the bag environment, and therefore they are very effective in increasing the quality and quantity of stored seeds, encouraging farmers to store for longer durations because they reduce the uncertainty associated with storing for a longer period, that when you go to open the bag up, hey, it's going to be a big mess of pests and damaged grains, and potentially improving food security as a result. There's not as much research into actually the private demand. So there's projects going on right now associated with this, and trying to market these bags and trying to get them into the mainstream kind of agricultural suppliers. Actually, a project done by a former PhD student of ours in Ghana showed actually really high willingness to pay in areas with low access to these bags. They were essentially off the scale that we had originally set in like a BDM auction. So people really were willing to pay the maximum amount. In contrast, there's some papers in Malawi and Niger where the private demand was kind of disappointing for these bags. So not as much in terms of that research. And so we're going to be kind of entering into both sides of this, looking at the technology adoption side with respect to hermetic storage, and how and the demand for it, and how risk and credit constraints might affect that. So how are we going to kind of address these liquidity and risk constraints? Well, credit, we've decided, hey, that's easy. So if you got a bag and you're offering it to people, you can say, you can pay me later. All right, so that one's easy. The risk is a more difficult one. And in particular, what we're going to be looking for is smaller hermetic storage bags, and we're going to be looking at the seed market in Bangladesh. And I'll talk about that, the reason in a minute or two. But one risk is you save your seed from the previous season. You want to make sure that that seed is kind of viable and good quality when you go to plant it, and that's a big part of your agricultural investment portfolio. And so someone comes along, hey, you can store your seed in this bag, it'll be a little more high quality. You might be a little worried about the payoff to this technology. Well, one way that we're going to look at trying to kind of alleviate that risk constraint is a warranty. All right, so we're going to give people a warranty and say, hey, you buy this bag, you can store your seed. If when you open it up, you don't like what you see, essentially you can get not only a refund on the bag, but the value of the stored seed will actually, you just give us the bag of what you stored. We'll go to the market and figure out the market price and actually give you the payment. So we're going to see how offering that warranty actually affects the demand for these bags. So a little bit of a review, a little bit of a preview. So farmers are willing to pay only a really small premium for these hermetic bags over existing just regular plastic bags. But there's some pretty substantial regional heterogeneity in that, in the willingness to pay. Credit increases demand for the bags, and again, this is a heterogeneous effect. And the magnitude is important here, because essentially we have two different regions we're working in. Credit completely closes the gap between them. We basically have a high demand region, a low demand region. Credit completely closes the gap, almost exactly. I had to check the numbers like 20 times because it was interesting how precise the result was. Warranties do nothing. So we're kind of like really interested in this. This is kind of like, hey, we can try to look at another way of doing risk, and we find almost no effect of warranties. So All right, so why do we look at this? So rice production in Bangladesh, Bangladesh is a success story in many respects in terms of agricultural production productivity. Rice productivity has really increased a lot. So most of the news is good in terms of rice production. There's the seed sector kind of remains a little bit of a lagging development, when people talk about potential issues and reasons why maybe we see leveling off in rice productivity performance, a lot of people point to the seed sector. There's some literature on this, especially during this main rain-fed almond season. Right? And this is a season where actually finding, regionally appropriate and varieties that farmers want is a little bit more difficult, and where farmers kind of complain about access a little bit more. And this is where you're actually going to see, as a result, farmers relying on their own seed and own seed storage. So in our sample in the data that we collect, 40% of the kind of rice acreage during this main almond season is actually planted with stored seeds. You can actually see, if you look, adding up these three bars, hit a little hazard for me. But if you look over these three bars, this is saying that about half of that acreage is actually just unpacked seed completely, because sometimes they're storing their own seed from their own production. Sometimes they're buying seed from the farmers in their villages. And sometimes they're getting it loose at like a very local market. Actually, when we did something like pilot, like pre kind of visits, I expected this to be bigger based on what people talked about. But I think this kind of, in general, we're seeing, about half of the farmers here, about half of the acreage is being planted with stored seed of some kind locally. So there might be an issue with storage, and this might be something that's important. And one of the reasons why we're working here is because we're working with Bangladesh Agricultural University, and one of the projects they did was actually comparing seed quality based on storage methods. And so this is a figure reproduced from their paper. And the way to read this is just to say, here we have hermetic storage, and we have very high germination rates at the top. When we get to regular plastic bags, they're kind of lower in the 60 to 70%. These are traditional methods, Dole and Mocha, and they're pretty low. Plastic drum does pretty well as well, but pretty good as well. That's a more expensive option. In our sample, about half of our farmers complain about seed quality. And in particular, about 30% of the farmers who are planting rice during almond season are complaining about poor germination. So how are they storing seeds? Well, the modal method is actually the Motka, the traditional method that does the worst. But actually, if we kind of add up all the different ways of plastic bags, a lot of them are also using plastic bags, usually plastic bag in a fertilizer bag or plastic bag by itself. Again, performed worse in the lab tests and the field tests in terms of storage than hermetic bags. Nobody's using a hermetic bag because there's none. This is a totally novel bag that we're introducing. So what do? We have 2 rounds of household surveys. We're going to do a BDM auction, an incentivized auction. Elicit willingness to pay. And we're going to randomly assign the households to different treatment arms. So this is going to, in the first round, very standard cluster randomized trial, village gets assigned to either be the credit group for, pay later bag, you get a warranty, or control villages. So we're going to do that. We're going to do our BDM, do our household survey, collect our data. We're going to come back later. We're going to do a second round, and here we're going to do a slightly more complicated design. Now we're going to do an individual randomization with a 3x2 design. The 3 being either you're one of these, either you get a credit or warranty offer or nothing. Then the overlaid design is you get an information treatment. Because what happens is when you do a warranty, what's kind of cool about a warranty is in round 1 is you get some information, which is how many redemptions were there, right? You can tell people okay, we did, you know, people that got a warranty, did they actually want their money back or not? And the reason why we actually want to do this in round two is we called up everyone, we asked them if they wanted to redeem their warranty, nobody wanted to. So this seems pretty good, right? This seems like would be a good marketing strategy. So we actually randomly give people that information. Okay, so details, what is credit? 6 months later, you have to pay. As we talked about the warranty and the information treatment. So here's a little bit of a visual description. So we have 90 villages. So very simple cluster randomization in the first round. And individually, the individual randomization, this is how we're kind of breaking up in the second round. All right. So we're working December 2009 to February 2021. And we're going to be working in 2 districts. So if you think about that timeline, round 1 and then COVID. So round 1 is, you know, and then COVID, and not only COVID, we actually have big flooding in it. And that's actually going to be important because these 2, I mentioned we have some geographic heterogeneity in our results. And this is really going to show up because even though we selected these regions to be rice growing regions where basically every farmer grows rice, you're going to see that in Noral, which is a more marginal rice producing area where the rice production is more marginal, the response to this flooding was pretty stark because basically a quarter of the farmers just gave up with rice farming. So I'm going to skip the balance test. You have to believe me that they're pretty balanced. And just show some results. So I promised that warranty had no effect. So if we just look at round 1, so very simple cluster randomization. Basically, we're seeing pretty much zeros at the, you know, when we look at total. When we, you know, break it up by district, and we see some small maybe effect in Noral, but very, very imprecise and slightly negative actually in Sherpur. So these seem to be zeros as far as we can understand. Credit, you know, especially if we exclude those who say, hey, who totally failed our BDM test. So the auction kind of understanding test where we kind of see that people understand how this auction's working. If we exclude those, certainly we have, you know, a very high effect relative to our mean of 29 taka for the bag. But that's really hiding the heterogeneity of our region. In this very kind of more marginal rice growing area, that's where credit is actually, that's where the credit is having the effect. And as I was saying, the magnitude of the effect, if you take this number added here, is pretty much closing this gap. If we look at by all the rounds, so if we just kind of naively say, okay, we're just going to throw all the treatment effects of all the rounds together, we'll forget about the interaction effects, we're going to just assume they're 0, just to kind of see, similarly consistent story. Credit has an impact, especially in Noral, warranties do nothing. When we add in the information treatment, right, where we say, okay, well, we're telling people all about how great the bag is because nobody wanted to redeem it, doesn't really do much. Potentially by district, right, there's some evidence that maybe these in Sherpur, the higher demand district, that maybe this information, you know, helped. So potentially there's some value here in this, just the information content from the warranty on marketing, but it's not a consistent or robust story. So summarize, warranties fail to impact the, you know, demand. There's no increase in effectiveness in round 2 when trust may have increased. So that was a thought we had maybe after round 1. They didn't go up. Hey, they don't believe us that we're going to come back and we're going to try to redeem the warranties. And we called and we were there and said, hey, do you want to redeem your bags? And when we came back, same story. So it doesn't seem like the trust story, and that's something we talk about in the insurance literature a little bit, is really what's underlying the null impact. We also did, some people saw a presentation, a kind of spin-off where we gives warranties for a different item, one they were really familiar with, to see if warranties are maybe a signaling some kind of information, like maybe they're showing that they're positive because, hey, you know, if they're standing behind this product with a warranty, it must be great. Or maybe it's a negative signal, like, how come they're telling me this thing might fail, right? So we tried to use a product that we're familiar with to eliminate the risk element, just to see if there's an information signal in the warranty, and that didn't seem to do nothing as well. So credit did seem to equalize demand, and this is actually really consistent with, I think, a really interesting study in Tanzania, where we have a similar kind of marginal kind of group of farmers where credit seems to like be the big gap closer, but it didn't, you know, very heterogeneous effects. So, and low overall demand. So I'm going to stop there, take questions. Thank you very much. Yes.
I'm just curious if you know if there's any cultural norm that inhibits adopting warranties, maybe they don't want to bother you, or there's a high premium on taking personal responsibility for failure. I don't know. I'm just curious is that a norm? It's them bothering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's a good question, actually. It's something that, you know, certainly when we were discussing with all our Bangladeshi partners, wasn't brought up, or there wasn't any reason why people would say, oh, this is not going to fly here in this village. But, you know, and qualitatively, and one of the things that was a little, maybe disappointing might be the wrong word, but like somewhat surprising on the results, is that when we talked to our data field team, they seem to say, like, when we talked about the warranty with a couple of the farmers, like, they seemed like, oh, whoa, that's like really cool. So like qualitatively, the feedback seemed to be good, but actually when you do this incentivized auction, so it's not, so like they have to actually put their money down, it didn't seem to make a difference in terms of like moving demand. So the answer is it's not as far as I'm aware, but I'm not going to dismiss that maybe there is some reason why, you know, if not culturally, or at least because of the way, maybe there's a kind of it wouldn't shock me, right, if there's some idiosyncratic reason why, like, oh, because there was a certain product 20 years ago that also had a warranty that was terrible, that, if I can't rule that out. Gibron.
So in the credit setting, could the farmers be assuming that this guy will never come back again? It's just offer them. And
Yeah, maybe. So, but the results are pretty consistent in round 2 and round 1. So if they thought that, and that was the reason for the high version, we would see like the credit, I think, treatment like really crater in round 2, because they're like, oh, these guys are back again. Like, they're really gonna bother me. But I think not, but it's good. And I mean, I think I'm going to say one thing that really has nothing to do specifically with this project, but I think that is a difficult thing that we deal with when we, especially in impact evaluation type work, is that it's very difficult to gauge what respondents and participants often believe about how long the program will be in place. Like, and so when you have, anytime you're looking at cash transfer impact and investments and long-term, does this affect investment and those types of things? That's a variable that is hard to control for, because even though the researcher might know this is a short-term project, or we're going to be back, like, we don't really know what the respondents' beliefs are about that. And that's actually kind of hard to measure even, because there's some endogeneity in the response to those questions. So that's a kind of a separate issue, but something I think about a lot. But I think that's also important when we think about, you know, insurance and warranties and credit, because obviously that's going to affect the payoff function in people's heads about, you know, is this warranty going to be honored? Do I have to actually pay? So yeah.
And just to add that, the credit group, there's surprisingly many farmers pay on site. They need that. So that's a group that we need to look at it as well. They probably don't want to worry about it after 6 months. And we didn't hear much from the field in terms of collecting that deferred payment. I think everybody paid.
Yeah.
So that's it. Seems like that's working as we planned. Obviously, subgroup that the teacher would probably should pay. Spread that reach this problem. That's something that we look at.
Yes.
Very interesting. Did you measure their trust or risk preferences?
Yes. The risk preferences just said, do we actually look at the heterogeneity and results by that?
We try to control for it. Nothing changed.
Yes, I think that's right. I think when we control for nothing changed in the warranty results. So, but there could be potential ways in which. So I do believe we actually in the second round collected some loss aversion measures, and I don't think we used those as much. And you could imagine that maybe those are more correlated with warranty demand. So. But yeah, that's a good point. And probably something you should emphasize more.
So your participants, they never participate in similar treatment?
No.
Because they were campaigning back previous.
No, they had no experience with hermetic bags, and so we did have a module. We worked with the Bangladesh Agricultural University to present some information on why these might be desirable. And they hadn't ever done a BDM auction, so I didn't really explain the way this works. But you know, BDM auction is essentially the respondents give their maximum willingness to pay, and then you draw a random number, and if the number is below the number that they stated, they pay the random number. But if the number that is drawn is above the actual willingness to pay, they don't get a chance to buy. So it's mostly incentive compatible. There's some literature on edge cases of why. So you know they had responded. Participated in that, and actually the data collection firm didn't have a ton of experience with this, so there was a lot of training. Giuseppe did a lot of work on working with them, but we did have, so we can do it like a practice round, and to just kind of test whether they really got it. And so if we in the first round, the results are kind of sensitive to how good they did in the practice round. In the second round, however, you know, and everybody got it by that point. So, you know, and that's why, you know, the results are so consistent. We don't think that's really driving the story.
I'm just thinking, so, because I don't know about this, is this hermetic bag hard to use? It's difficult to use, isn't it?
So it depends.
It's not hard to use, but it might be hard to use correctly.
Yeah.
Compared to the plastic.
Yeah, because the big thing about the hermetic storage is that it really needs to be sealed, like properly and stay sealed. So there's some, you know, mostly it's used for grain storage. So there's a couple complicated reasons why Bangladesh it's not encouraged, but in the seed storage context, it shouldn't be that difficult because you don't need the seed in the growing season. So, but in the context of sometimes the experiments with grain storage, sometimes it's a little more complicated to store because, you know, when you're storing for consumption, you're opening the bag up, taking out the sealing in the air. So the potential failure in some sealing even still, they should be more effective. That's, unless you're already.
And the education part that we did in the field during the survey was pretty quick and simple. They know how to, but yeah, it is simple if you do it correctly, and you don't have to move it until the end. That's the demonstration that they did.
Yeah, I think if we had maybe put a little more emphasis on potentially hyping up the benefits, put a little more on trying to sell that. We were a little bit more interested in the treatment effects here. Just making sure that people get the bags and are excited about it, but it could potentially kind of just depress the, even the kind of potential effects of it. Just slacks.
Thinking it's because there's a linkage, like those who get the shares with those who are controlling. Because,
Uh,
not like,
So in the first round, we have, it's total, but yeah, I guess if you're saying hey, your neighbor won the auction,
sort
you know, I need to buy. The way we structured the survey was we did all the data collection one day, and then the next day they came back to do the auction. So it wasn't like sequential. So there was like, everybody should have been doing the auctions in their own house at the same time. So I don't know that like we would have known if your neighbor won or not, but it's not implausible.
Yeah, I would say impossible in round one, but round two could happen from round one.
Yeah.
But one bad. We do know that we did control for the ones, one of the bad, the last round. That's the analysis we did, but yeah, we don't know neighbors from the bad. Other thing would be that they could have used this for random things, that's these stories, but that's another story. Might be worthwhile.
let's see what I see in a local average.
Yeah. What if actually, do we have the GIS coordinates? I think so. Actually don't know.
We're actually 3 minutes.
Yeah, we're over time. So I mean, I appreciate everyone.